Hi there. It's so good to meet you and to be here with you today for my very first episode of what hopefully will be lots of fun. Basically a cooking demonstration, probably lots of mistakes, lots of messes, because that's how I cook. I don't seem to be able to walk into the kitchen without making a mess, but hopefully there'll be some good food that'll come along the way. So I'm going to start out with recipes related to canning, because it's that time of year here in Ohio and I have lots of veggies out of the garden and lots of good things to eat and lots of fun playing in the dirt and then playing in the kitchen afterwards. But first off, a little bit of an introduction to some of the things you might need for your canning experience. There's not a lot of specialty equipment that you need for canning. It depends on what kind of canning you want to do. I started out with basic water bath canning, which is where you put your produce into canning jars and you seal and sterilize them in your canning pot. They're placed in hot water and the action of the water boiling sterilizes the food, eliminates excess air from the jars and seals the jars and makes them safe for long-term storage. So this is the pot I started out with. Probably, my kids were little, so maybe 25 years ago, my very first pot that I still use. So I think that's a good indication of what a good investment your canning equipment is, because you buy it and it usually lasts a lifetime. So this is a pretty basic pot that works well for water bath canning. It has a lid, it has a colander, which I don't use a lot, which is probably not a good thing. I should use it. It has an interior straining pot, and it also has, I'm not sure what you call this thing, but it also has a straining portion. I use it as the basket to separate the food jars from the bottom of the pan while they're being sterilized. Because if you have your jars in the pot, directly on the bottom of the pot, the heat coming from the stove can crack your glasses, break the jars, cause a big mess. So having a basket in the bottom of the pot is essential. There's a couple of different ways that you can improvise, as long as you have a big pot and you have something to raise the jars from the bottom of the pot while they're being processed. You don't need a special canning pot, and as you probably noticed, that's a pretty basic pot that you can buy anywhere, a multi-purpose pot, and I use it almost exclusively just for canning. So I started out with some pretty easy tomato canning recipes. They're probably about the easiest because they are suitable for water bath canning. And then I moved up to pressure canning. There's lots of different pressure canners on the market today. Some of them have what we call weighted gauge. Others have a dial that indicates the pressure. So here is my canner that I bought probably just a few years after I started canning and had a little success with tomatoes. So this is probably like 20 years old as well. I keep it in the box because it gets stored for a good part of the year and it's easier to store it in the box. That way I always have reference to how many jars, what the capacity is, the model number, should I ever need replacement parts. So that just helps me out. And when you open the box, you'll find I keep all kinds of stuff in there with the canner. I keep some favourite recipes that I printed off the internet. I keep my blue book, my bold blue book of home canning, which I actually have two of these. One that I bought when I first started and another that I picked up just a few years ago at a yard sale. So, just to have a look at this, explain some of the parts of this. So I'll come back to the lid. As you can see, I store things inside the pot. So here's the pot. Just a big old heavy duty aluminum pot with the rack to keep the jars from the bottom of the pot while they're processing. And the lid. So now that we've looked at the pot, let's look at the lid. This is kind of important. There's different, as I said, there's different kinds. This particular model has a gasket that's removable and replaceable, and that is really important to keep that in good condition. And the lid has parts need to be inspected each time you do some canning with it to make sure that everything's in good condition. This little vent here, which is where the gauge is placed, you need to look through the little hole every time you're going to use this. Make sure that that hole is clear, that you can see all the way through. So if you can't see light on the other side, you'll need to clean that. This little rubber doohickey here is also removable. That's a safety feature that if too much pressure should build up inside the pot during the processing, the presser would force this little cap out and release the pressure to make it safer. Now when I was a kid, my mum got a pressure cooker, and she was so scared of it, which is why it took me a while to finally get one. That she was scared of it and afraid that it was going to explode on her. And I think in the early days of pressure cookers being released to the public for use, that was a problem. But today the pressure cookers are just so much safer. And then we have this pressure valve, which comes apart, is removable, and when steam builds up inside the pressure cooker during processing, that will raise, and that's how you know that the pressure cooker has indeed pressure inside. So let me see if I can show this to you. So when there's steam inside, that will push that up. And then when it cools down at the end of processing, when it's been turned off, that'll drop down and you'll know that the pressure's been released. So as I mentioned, this is a weighted gauge pressure cooker, and comes with a valve that goes on top, or a regulator that goes on top. And this one is in 3 pieces. When you strip the rings off it, that's a 5-pound gauge. If you add 1 ring, it's a 10-pound gauge. With the 3rd ring, it becomes a 15-pound gauge. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through some recipes. And then when you are pressure cooking, this just goes right on top there, and we're done. It'll start wobbling, but you'll see that when I do a demonstration. And that is that. Now I want to show you another kind of water bath canner that I have. Because that pot is kind of small, I can't do more than about 4 pints in that. It's really great for small batches, but if I want to do more than 4 pints, I can use my pressure canner as a water bath canner as well. But I do have this baby that I bought at a yard sale quite a while back, and it cost a few dollars. As you can see, it's much bigger. It has the rack inside, so it fits the cans in there, and they lift quite easily in and out of the pot. But there's all kinds of choices and options out there on the market that make the whole canning experience so much easier than it probably was in our grandparents' day. Some other equipment that you might find useful to have, and I find them indispensable. I went out and I bought a kit a lot of years ago. It has a jar lifter, which you'll see in operation soon, a funnel for filling the jars, a magnetic lifter for the lids. When you heat the lids and the pans, they get kind of hot, so you can pull them out of your pot of water with the magnet. My friend Bosco saying hello. And this little doohickey is for measuring your headspace, which I will talk about too when I do a demo, and also for removing air bubbles from your can of food. So there's this little gadget that make it so much easier, and I find them indispensable. So I do recommend you get a set of those tools. So, now canning jars, you can't can without the jars. Buy good quality jars, because if you don't, you'll could end up with the jars breaking in the pot and ruining a whole batch of produce. They come in wide mouth and regular mouth. And just to show you the difference, in case you're not familiar with these, buy the lid separately. And of course I didn't open the thing before I started, did I? So that's the wide mouth lid, and that's a regular mouth lid. The difference is the shoulder that the regular jars have compared to the wide mouth that will be straight. Canning jars typically come in 1 quart, 1 pint and half pint, which is generally for your jams and your jellies. Although I have seen 1 gallon jars, I can't imagine having a canning pot that would hold a 1 gallon jar, so I think maybe they are, not quite sure what they're for, but I'm sure they're just more for storage, I would think. But feel free to send me a message and tell me what they're actually for. So I actually started out using quart jars for almost everything. We were a family of 6, so when we ate food, we ate a lot of it between the 6 of us. Now I find I more frequently use the 1 pint jar. They give a really good quantity for, say, serving of vegetables for everyone that's still in the house, or broth for using in recipes, that sort of thing. And that is pretty much it. There's not a lot else that you need. Oh, just on the side, the jars and the rings for the jars are reusable. Your lids, however, can only be used 1 time because of the wax that they have on them. Will only be good for a seal 1 time. So just before you use the jars, particularly if you're reusing them, sort of run your finger around the top edge of the jar just to make sure there's no nicks or cracks. You know, any damage at all will mean that your jar probably won't seal properly, which means you could lose a jar of good food. So some other things that will be useful. Just if you have them on hand, stainless steel strainers, A food mill is handy. I just bought one of those last season. I had never had one before, but I found it really useful. A food processor makes things easy if you're doing big batches, particularly of jellies and jams or relishes. That would be useful. Oh, the other thing you'll need, hot pads or some sort of protective, heat protective material to protect your countertop. But as you're lifting hot jars in and out of your canning pot, you need to be able to put them somewhere safe. So you can use, a lot of times I use a cutting board with a towel over it. I use hot pads and trivets. Just have these things handy before you start. It will make life a lot easier. You'll need lots of towels. If you're anything like me, you make a big mess. You'll need lots of towels. And that's pretty much it for the basic equipment. I'm sure that I'll think of more as we go and as we demonstrate. So that's just to get started. So in our series on canning, I'm going to show you some jelly. I'm going to show you tomato juice and some relish and some vegetables. That sounds like a good selection. So we'll get started on those in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for joining me